So today I want to talk to you about some ideas from human communication. So we all communicate with other people, obviously. One idea is relational mods theory by anthropologist Alan Fiske. It's interesting. I don't think I've ever seen this in communication books. But according to Professor Fiske, there are 4 ways of interacting with other people. And he has labels for each one of these: communal sharing, authority ranking, equity matching, and market pricing. And the idea is that all humans everywhere interact in one of these 4 modes. Different cultures will have different ways of interacting. But all humans are pre-programmed through our genetics and through our evolution to communicate in these 4 ways, in these 4 ways of interacting with other people. In the first one, communal sharing, the idea is that there is us and then there is them. There is an in-group and there is an out-group. And people who are in our in-group are part of us. They're on our team. And this unites us against other teams. So what's important if you're in a communal sharing way of processing or thinking or communicating, the key thing is it us or them. If it is us, if somebody needs something, we give it to them. If we can provide it, we do it. And others do it for us too. So maybe us might be family, right? So parents do things for their children, right? Children do things for their parents. Maybe it's classmates. Maybe it's people from our country. Maybe it's people in our tribe. Maybe it's people on our athletic team. But if we're in communal sharing, we treat everybody the same within the group, and we distinguish them from the outsiders, who we don't treat that way. The second way of interacting with people is in terms of authority ranking. Every human culture has status or hierarchy. Different cultures will communicate it differently. So both at University of Alabama, where I teach, and here, students will call me professor, right? But here they will say Professor Nim, right? And bow. American students won't do that. But the idea is that I'm higher status, and there's rules for interacting based on the status. And within reason, students should do what I tell them, right? And I need to tell them what to do. So I need to tell them what the assignments are and what they need to read and what they need to learn, right? And students will, by and large, listen to me and do this. And there's all kinds of authorities. There's political authorities. There's religious authorities. There's authority structure within families. So one way to orient is just us and them, right? And we're all the same within. Another way is in terms of status or hierarchy. And if you want to be a good communicator, you need to know when to communicate this way, and you need to know when to communicate this way, and you need to know how to do it. The most famous research.
University. The subjects are 40 males between the ages of 20 and 50 residing in the greater New Haven area.
Psychologists have developed several theories to explain how people learn. One theory is that people learn things correctly whenever they get punished for making a mistake.
40 years later, Milgram's infamous experiment, obedience, is still taught in classrooms around the world.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Learn. All right, now the next thing we'll have to do is set the learner up so that he can get some sort of punishment.
What inspired Milgram, I would say there were a number of factors. One of them is he was very ambitious. He wanted to make a mark in social psychology. And he wanted, as he wrote to one friend, he wanted to come up with the boldest experiment that he could think of.
About 2 years ago, I was at the Veterans Hospital in West Haven. And while there, they detected a heart condition. There's nothing serious, but as long as I'm having these shocks, how strong are they? How dangerous are they?
Well, no, although they may be painful, they're not dangerous. Anything else?
No, that's all.
All right, teacher, would you take the test and be seated in front of the shock generator, please, in the next room?
But the experiment was rigged.
The victim was an accomplice of the experiment. The victim, according to plan, provided many wrong answers. His verbal responses were standardized on tape, and each protest was coordinated to a particular voltage level on the shock generator.
Now, as teacher, you were seated in front of this impressive-looking instrument, the shock generator. Its essential feature is a line of switches that goes from 15 volts to 450 volts, and a set of verbal designations that goes from slight shock to moderate shock, strong shock, very strong shock, intense shock, extreme intensity shock, and finally XXX, danger severe shock. Your job, the experimenter explains to you, is a word pair test. If he gets each answer correctly, fine, you move on to the next pair. But if he makes a mistake, you were instructed to give him an electric shock, starting with 15 volts, and you increase the shock 1 step on each error.
Incorrect. You'll now get a shock of 105. Hard head. Just how far can you go in this thing? As far as is necessary. What do you mean as far as is necessary? 450 switch for each wrong answer. Continue, please. I'm not getting no answer. Don't the man's health mean anything? Whether the learner likes it or not, we must... But he might be dead in there.
Milgram made the point, I think very effectively, that the Nazis weren't all a bunch of psychopaths at Belsen and Dachau.
People are told to shock one more switch every time the person makes the wrong answer. And they end up making lots of wrong answers. At 120 volts, they start screaming and protesting. At 300 volts, they stop responding. So the question is, what percentage of, and if the person, the experiment and the subject doesn't want to do it, the experimenter tells them they have to. So the question is, what percent of people will shock the person all the way up to 450 3 times just because somebody in a white lab coat who appears to be a professor is telling them to? 50? Over 50? 95? 2/3. 65%. Just because they told them to. They activated the authority ranking module. Do what you're told. Person's in authority. What's your guess? If we did this experiment in Korea, this was done at Yale University in New Haven, Connecticut, in the United States. If we did it in Korea, would it be higher or lower? Why? You're right, why? There is this cultural idea called authority ranking, and that cultures differ in how much difference is there between somebody of different statuses. So if I'm teaching in America, how much difference is my status as professor from the status of my students? Versus if I'm professor in Korea, how much difference is there between my status as professor and you as a student? And the answer is, I'm higher status here. There's more difference. And the more difference there is in authority, the stronger the authority. In equality matching, there's probably a better word for this, which is reciprocation. Equality matching is return in kind. If somebody does something for you, you should do something for them. If they give you a gift, you should give them a gift back. If they compliment you, you should give them a compliment back. If they tell you something about themselves, you should disclose something back about yourself to them. Return in kind. If they insult you, you insult them back. I don't know if any of you is following American politics right now, but American politics has gone completely crazy. And a big part of its craziness is a presidential candidate named Donald Trump. And one of the many features of him is every time he perceives an insult, he insults back. Just amazing reciprocity. One of the most important applications of equality matching or reciprocation in communication is how you deal with conflict. So when you're in a disagreement with somebody, once somebody gets confrontational, the tendency is for the other person to get confrontational back. I saw this happen on the street last night as I was walking around between a couple police and a guy who was selling, and a butcher. And I'm not sure what they were arguing about, but it was definitely escalating. Right? So somebody is belligerent to you, natural tendency is to be belligerent back. But the opposite's also true. If you're reconciliatory or you try to compromise, then the natural tendency is to try to compromise back too. So the way to de-escalate conflict is to not reciprocate. But our natural tendency is once the reciprocation module gets kicked in, this is how we tend to do it. We tend to reciprocate. But you can try to break the cycle and get people to reciprocate with you. And in market pricing has to do with exchange of goods that are different in kind. So this would be things like bargaining and negotiation. Everything from political negotiations to buying vegetables at a local market. So the idea is that we have these 4 different ways of interacting with people. And cultures will have their specific rules for how you do reciprocity, for how you do negotiation, for how you respond and treat authority, and for how we do us and them. But when we're communicating with other people, we tend to go into one of these 4 modes of communicating. Then we enact one of these 4 modes of communication as dictated by our culture. And this provides one of the ways of understanding human communication. Another important aspect of human communication that applies in all cultures, although to different degrees, is conformity and social norms. All cultures have social norms. All people have the tendency, when they're uncertain what to do, to look and see what everybody does. When I lived in Hawaii, I noticed a strange trend where oftentimes there would be multiple lines for something, like you're going through the school cafeteria, and people had a tendency to get into the longer line, which I thought was really odd, because why wouldn't you get in the shorter line? Wouldn't you want to go through it faster? And the answer was probably, well, that's what everybody else is getting in. There must be some reason for it, right? Do what everybody else does. I don't know if you can see this cartoon here. This is an American cartoon called The Far Side. Suddenly, Professor Libowitz realizes he has come to the seminar without his duck. So you can see everybody has ducks except for him. Humor is hard to translate. 2 of the most important researchers in conformity are Mustafa Sharif and Solomon Asch. So Mustafa Sharif is most famous for Robbers Cave experiments. He was studying group formation and status formation. So he had a summer camp with boys and brought them to a summer camp and studied them and saw how they started forming networks and friendships and group norms and hierarchies within their groups. And he had multiple groups of boys. And once norms were established, then he let them know that there are other groups at the camp. So it created intergroup conflict. And then he experimentally tried different methods of reducing that conflict. But what's important for us today is some of his earlier work on something called the autokinetic effect. And the autokinetic effect was an illusion from psychology. And it works like this. Imagine this room is totally black. So you come into a totally dark room with only a single point of light. Little tiny finger-sized light, and you sit across the room. And you have to look at the light. And the question is the light moving? And if so, how? And the light is in fact stationary. But everybody sees it as moving. And the reason is because our eye muscles aren't strong enough to stay perfectly still. Right? It's like if you're holding a camera. Right? It's very hard to hold the camera perfectly still because the hands have little movements in them, right? Well, so do the eye muscles. And what this creates is just like the effect of having a jittery camera, right? Is the light will move around randomly. At first it's okay, it's stable, right? But then after you watch it for a while, your eyes will get tired and it'll start moving. And the way it's moving is just random because it's random fluctuations, right? So if you ask people, you have 4 different subjects or 3 different subjects, how it's moving and how much it's moving, they'll see it all differently. And this is very well documented in the early days of psychology. What Sharif's innovation was, is he brought people in groups to do it. And they had to say, how much do you see it's moving? And the longer they watched it, the more they converged on how the light was moving. So there came to be group norms in light movement. And it really wasn't moving at all, right? It's just stationary. And the interesting thing is, once these norms are established, now if you bring in new subjects and introduce them to the group will socialize them in how the light is moving, which is some of the first experimental evidence documenting norms.
The gentleman in the elevator now is a candid star. These folks who are entering, the man with a white shirt, the lady with a trench coat, and subsequently one other member of our staff, will face the rear. And you'll see how this man in the trench coat tries to maintain his individuality, but little by little, he looks at his watch, but he's really making an excuse for turning just a little bit more to the wall. Now we'll try it once again. Here's the candid subject. Here comes the candid camera staff, 3 of them at least. And this man has apparently been in groups before. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door, everybody's changed positions. Now we'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
So the next experiment
is one of psychology's oldest
after the Sharif one
pieces of
was
research.
Ash.
A volunteer is told that he's taking part in a visual perception test. What he doesn't know is that the other participants are actors, and he's the only person taking part in the real test, which is actually about group conformity.
Please begin. The experiment you will be taking part in today
have to match the lines.
Of line length. Your task will be simply to look at the line here on the left and indicate which of the 3 lines on the right is equal to it in length. So, for example, if
The actors have been told to match the wrong lines. The volunteer will be monitored to to see if he gives the correct answer or if he goes along with the opinion of the group and gives the wrong answer. In the first test, the correct answer is 2.
1. 1.
1.
Two.
1. Once again, the correct answer is 2.
3. 3. 3.
3. The Ash experiment has been repeated many times, and the results have been...
What percent of people conform? 2/3? Higher or lower? Higher? Let me ask the question differently. So there's multiple times. What percent of the time do people conform on average? 35 maybe? Pretty good. Here are the actual results. They actually did the experiment 3 times, and they had a control group with no group. So here's how you read it. So they did there were 12 trials, right? Saw the lines 12 times where the other group members gave the wrong answer. So this is how many errors people made. If you conformed every time, it would be 12. If you never conformed, it would be 0. So in the control group, people almost never got it wrong, right? 35 out of 37 subjects. When you're reading research, N means number of subjects. So 35 out of 37 subjects never made an error. They got 12 out of 12 right. One got 11 out of 12 right. And another one wasn't very good at the task and only got 10 out of 12 right. Still 80%, right? So did the experiment 3 times at 3 different American universities. On average, the number of errors was 36%, 37% rounding. So a little over 1/3. If we did this in Korea, would it be higher or lower? Higher. Why? There's a intercultural idea called collectivism. And Koreans are collectivistic. And in collectivistic cultures, norms are stronger and exert more influence. And lo and behold, when this study is done in places like Korea and other Asian countries, conformity is higher, sometimes considerably higher. But there's a catch. What if you were doing this study and all the other people giving the wrong answer were Korea University students? Then your conformity would be higher. But what if you were doing the study and they were all Yonsei students? Would you conform with them? Be lower. So it has to be within your in-group for it to work. The usual interpretation of these results is look how strong conformity is. Everybody see that? We have less than 1% in the control group, 37% in the experimental group. And that is a huge difference, right? More than 40 times higher. In most social science research, you don't see differences that are 40 times bigger than the control group, right? Huge differences. But when I look at these findings, that's not what I see. Here's what I see. So if the average is 1/3, that's around 4 out of 12, right? Somewhere in here. What I see is most people aren't average. Out of 123, there's 30 who never conform. There's 6 people who always conform. And there's people everywhere in between. So what I see is what I would call individual differences. Not everybody's the same. Same experiment, not everybody acts the same way. What the researchers tend to do is they tend to focus on the average. Focusing on the average makes sense if most people are close to average. But it doesn't look to me like most people are close to average at all. Well, what this looks to me like is that there are people who are very norm-prone, right, and very susceptible to norms. And there's other people who are relatively oblivious to norms. And my guess is, in America, there might be more up here, right? And Korea, there might be more down here. But everywhere, there's going to be people all along the continuum, right? And you know people, right, who are always trying to fit in. And you know other people who are just kind of oblivious to it. And I find that interesting. And let me suggest to you, as media school students, your success in your chosen career will be determined largely by how good you are at figuring out who is who and who you're dealing with and how to target your communication towards them. Because if you're going to be a journalist, right, maybe all readers aren't the same. And if you're going to be a producer, maybe all audiences and all viewerships aren't going to be the same. And if you're a political correspondent, right, maybe you don't want to target the same message to everybody. And if you're an advertiser or a PR person, maybe you don't want to target the same message to everybody. And maybe if you're a professor, you don't want to use the same lecture for every student. Right? So maybe if I was doing this guest lecture someplace else, I would do it differently than I would do it here for you. Because people are different. And these differences matter. And there are some general trends, like we know that people conform. So we can use some kind of norm-based message. This is the #1 brand, right? Most people prefer this. But maybe those norm-based messages aren't going to be equally effective on everybody. So to the extent to which we can do our market research and target our audience, we're going to be more effective communicators. And this is true interpersonally, too. Last year, it's been just a little over a year, I started a new job at UAB in America. So, as new job, I'm kind of half professor, half administrator. My first two things I need to do, right? New job. Networking. I need to get to know people, right? Because who you know is power, social capital. So I've been spending a year meeting as many people as I can, right? And trying to make connections. Because the better connections I have, the more effective I'm going to be, right, in my job. And second, trying to figure out who the important people are and what motivates them and what their quirks are and what their idiosyncrasies are. Because I don't want to be communicating the same message to everybody, right? Because I don't presume there's ever one strategy that works on everybody. So I find out what's important to them and pitch that. Make sense? One size does not fit all. So, next topic is a concept I call individual differences. So everybody's different. You want to know your audience and adapt. And since I'm talking about human communication, I want to talk about 3 particular individual differences that I think are particularly important for interpersonal communication. And these are empathy, intelligence, and narcissism. Empathy is particularly important for good communication skills. Narcissism is the enemy of effective communication. I don't know if you follow anything about Donald Trump in America right now, but if he somehow becomes a presidential candidate, I'm going to volunteer to an opposition research strategy group and talk about how to defeat a narcissist. Because you do not want narcissists in positions of authority. And a third variable that I find particularly interesting, intelligence. So let's talk about empathy. People sometimes mean different things when they mean empathy. There's at least 3 important aspects to being an empathic person and an empathic communicator. And we can call these perspective taking, emotional contagion, and empathic concern. Perspective taking is the ability to adopt the viewpoint of other people. While different, we don't all see things the same way. If you were getting somebody a gift, should you get them the gift that you would want, or should you get them the gift that they would want? Should you treat other people like you want to be treated, or should you treat other people like they want to be treated? To do what they want to get, to how they want to be treated, requires perspective taking. You have to understand how they see things. If you are a freshman, you are just getting the cognitive ability to really do this well. Before age 3 to 5, little kids can't do it at all. And it gradually emerges through childhood, and it starts developing in high school, and people start perfecting it in early adulthood. And the ability to do it will make you a much better communicator. Other people will like you better if you can do it. Sometimes, this is a subcategory of something called theory of mind. Theory of mind is the ability to understand that other people are thinking things that are different than yours, than you think. So if you have theory of mind, you can think what other people are thinking. Or you can think what other people might be thinking about what you're thinking, right? Or you can think about what other people are thinking about you're thinking about them, right? And we won't get into an infinite regress here, right? Because there's a limit to how many layers we can hold in mind and simulate out at a given time. But the ability to understand others' viewpoints and adapt to them is obviously key. A second aspect of empathy is what might be called emotional contagion, or catching the emotions of others. Humans have the tendency to catch others' emotions, just like you can catch a virus or a disease. Emotions are contagious. You've probably experienced this. You're in a group of friends, somebody starts laughing and everybody starts laughing. Or you have a friend who's really upset and you start feeling upset too. If I had been thinking ahead, I might have brought a lemon into class, cut it into a quarter, and taken a bite and puckered, and watch how many of you go. So feeling others' emotions, there's this natural tendency. This, by the way, is the #1 secret to being a good professor. It helps to know your subject matter. It helps to be organized. But professors who are really into their material and really enthusiastic about it tend to make students enthusiastic too. It's not working on everybody, but I'm trying. And the third aspect is empathic concern. And this is generally caring about other people. So you can think of empathy in terms of understanding other people, in terms of catching emotions of others, and in terms of caring. Next slide. So some communication researchers did a series of studies looking at how these related to various communication skills and outcomes. So Jim Stiff has a very, very cool, he used to be a professor, Michigan State, Arizona State, Kansas, but he left being a professor. And now he has what I think is a very, very cool job. It's a very stressful job. But he is a consultant experimental persuasion consultant for attorneys. And here's what he and his company do if you have enough money. So if you are in a major lawsuit where there are millions of dollars at stake, he will run mock trials for you. And in these mock trials, he will experimentally test different lines of arguments. And he will bring in mock juries. And will test, because in any given argument, the argument can go lots of different ways. How do you know which one's best? You can speculate, or you can test it. So he does experiments testing different arguments for different trials. And if on different responses, and if the other side does this, how's the best response to this? And he will game it out strategically for his clients. So if they do this, your best response is this. And it's all experimentally tested. It is not cheap to have him do this, right? You got to have very deep pockets to hire him. And he can't be wrong, right? Because people will only pay huge money, right? If they're going to win. So it's very stressful, but it's very cool. Kathy Miller is actually his wife. She's a professor at Arizona State right now and has the #1 book on organizational communication and also a popular communication theory book. And James Dillard is a professor at Penn State. So they did these series of studies where they had people, they gave them surveys to assess their perspective taking, their empathic concern, and their emotional contagion. And then in one study, it was done in a persuasion class where they had charities come in and ask for volunteers. And so early in the semester, you do the empathy measures. And then later, this person comes in and talks about how they recruit volunteers for their charity. And then they see who volunteers and who doesn't. They have another lab experiment where you come into lab, you think it's going to be a study on interaction, you're in there with another subject, who's not really another subject, and you're in the waiting room, and they're obviously upset. And if you talk to them, which you may or may not do, you find out that they just broke up with their boyfriend or girlfriend. And this is all secretly videotaped, and they look at how effective the comforting is. They have a series of studies done with emergency room nurses and psychiatric workers and various people in high interaction occupations, and look at how good they are at communicating in their job, and also whether they get tired of their job and quit. And they find across all these studies a very similar pattern of results. And it seems to all start with perspective taking. People who have the ability to understand other people's perspectives accurately tend to care about people more. If you can understand other people's perspectives, you tend to be more caring. If you are more caring, you're more likely to volunteer. Being more caring helps you be an effective communicator. It's not just having perspective taking, right? Because if I can understand that if I tell you something, you're going to be upset, and then I do it anyways, right? It's not just the perspective taking, but it's the combination of perspective taking and caring that's going to make me communicate in a way that you find me to be a better communicator. But there's a catch. The more you care, the more you tend to get emotionally involved. And being emotionally involved makes you a worse communicator and makes you more likely to learn to hate your job. So with the good nurses, right, particularly in emergency rooms, everybody's stressed out in emergency rooms, right? People are not at their best behavior. The good nurses, if they're dealing with a patient upset or a family who's upset, they can't get upset too. If they start getting upset, it's going to make them worse at their job. So the key to effective communication is having perspective taking, caring, but severing this link here. And those people then don't have the burnout. They can maximize their effective communication and be better communicators. So So this is very important in any kind of occupation where you have to deal with public. And particularly if you have to deal with upset people. So any kind of customer service position, or any kind of position where you have to deal with people especially. I've often thought that one of the worst jobs in the world would be the person at the airport who has to deal with the people who just have lost luggage. If you let every upset person you interact with upset you, you're not going to be very healthy. The same with being a professor, right? I need to understand students' perspective. I need to care about my students. But at the end of the day, if a student has a problem, I don't take that home with me, right? I do my best to help them out within the policies of my institution because I care about them. But if they're upset, I don't get upset. And because of reciprocation, you can actually turn that, if you don't get upset, you can actually turn that around, right? Because if somebody's really upset and they're interacting with you, right? You know, students in my office crying, right? The best thing I can do for them is to stay calm, and sooner or later, they'll calm down too. Right? If you're dealing with somebody who's angry at you, throw them a little kindness back at them. It'll throw them off, right? It'll knock them out of their angry mode. And if it doesn't, maybe you've seen this happen, right? So here's angry person, here's the other person who's being nice back. Almost always, angry person, at some point, will look around and think, people are watching me, I'm being an asshole, better stop it. I'm making a fool out of myself. So very useful applied communication skills. Next slide. One of my personally favorite topics in social science is the research on intelligence. Here's a long and elaborate definition of intelligence. The key here is basically your ability to make sense out of things, ability to catch on, ability to figure out stuff. Some people are better at it than others. I went to graduate school with this super smart guy. His undergraduate, he was a physics and math dual major, and for some reason decided to do his PhD in communication. Do you guys know what the graduate record exam is? The GRE? It's the main test to get into graduate school. So if you would ever want to go to graduate school, especially in America, you'd have to take the GRE. So this guy took the GRE, did not study, took it cold, got a perfect score. He could have gone to any med school, any law school, anywhere in the world. Walk in, take the test cold, do it. No matter how hard I studied in school, and I studied a lot harder than he did, I could never do as well in any of the classes. Just wasn't going to happen. I don't know if you've ever met anybody that scary smart. Smart, though, isn't everything. Because we both got jobs coming out of graduate school at Big Ten universities in America. You know, top research. I got tenure in 3 years. He didn't get tenure. Normally, it's 5 to 7 years for tenure. As it turns out, working hard helps too. Because to be a successful professor, you can't just be smart. You got to be smart, but you can't just be smart. Right? You got to publish research and teach well and do a lot of other things. Know how to make connections. As it turns out, intelligence affects a lot of important life outcomes, maybe more than people realize. These are correlations. Correlations, so 0 would be two variables are completely unrelated. A perfect linear relationship is a 1.0. In the social sciences, things of 0.1 or 0.2 are considered small. 0.2 or 0.3 are moderate. 0.5 are considered really large. How well people do on academic achievement tests, like the GRE or SAT or test scores, smart people score higher, strongly. They do better with training assignments in the military. It's strongly related to work performance in jobs, but it depends on your job complexity. Right? If you have a simple job, intelligence doesn't help much. If you have a super complicated job, intelligence matters a whole lot. It correlates about 0.3, 0.4 with income. It's negatively, that's not a negative. It's correlated with unlawfulness. So dumb people are more likely to break the law. It correlates 0.4 with your social economic status of origin, that is, of your parents. Anybody know why that is? Why do smart people have wealthier parents? Come from better off families? Two. One is smart families are more likely to have higher income. They're also better likely to educate their children better because intelligence isn't fixed. So if you're in a more enriched environment, you can get better at it. You can get better at thinking. You can get smarter. And second, there's a strong genetic component to it. Most of my professor friends who have kids have smart kids. Not all of them, but especially my smart professor friends tend to have smart kids. But it correlates even higher with achieved economic status than with family economic status, which is interesting. And the thing I find most interesting, to my knowledge, it is the best predictor of who you're going to marry. The correlation in intelligence between spouses is around 0.5. And I don't know anything that correlates that highly with marital choice. Means smart people tend to marry smart people and dumb people tend to marry dumb people. I presume that if you're at Korean University, you are smart. You're way above average intelligence. So you have smart husbands and wives in your future. Very good statistical bet. Next slide. So this study was done in the United States. It tracked kids longitudinally over time. And so they tested them in intelligence very early in life and looked what happened to them in life. And it was matched on siblings. So these are all comparisons between brothers and sisters, where one brother and sister was smarter than the other. Does that make sense? So these comparisons are all people with the same exact experiences, or as similar experiences as you can have. The best way to control experiences, right, is within families. So it's not perfect because birth order matters and things like that. And in the utopian sample, they got rid of single family, single parent, all kinds of problem things. And then there's also the numbers for the full sample. So one is trying to get the best data they can. The other is just, what are the findings regardless of all that? And if you look at the patterns, they yield pretty same thing. So we have the normal people that are the middle 50%. You have the bright people, which are 75th to 90th percent, and then the top 10%. Then the 10th to 24th bottom, and the bottom 10%. So bottom 10% of kids don't even finish high school, on average. The top 10% graduate from college, then some. The median income for the top 10% is more than 3 times as large as the median income from the bottom 10%. 3 times difference in income is a big difference. There's even bigger differences in median family income. Again, smart people marry smart people. My household doesn't have 1 full professor income. It has 2 full professor incomes. It's a multiplier. Average number of children. Difference by 100% difference, right? Percent who happen to be married when they have those kids. Look at this difference. Let me put it to you, this is a variable that affects important life outcomes. These people live a lot longer. There was a study done in Scotland where they tested every second grader for decades in intelligence and then tracked them on what happens in life. Smart people live a lot longer. Why? They know how to take care of themselves. More likely to exercise, more likely to eat well, more likely to go to the doctor when a problem. If the doctor gives them instructions, they're more likely to follow it. They're much, much, much less likely from dying from stupid behaviors. Right? They know better than to keep the plugged-in thing away from the shower. Right? Oh, I can get through this train track in front of the train. Smart people, not a good idea. The neatest, coolest thing about intelligence is if I would test you all in second grade, it would tell you more about your life outcomes at age 50 than at your age 20. So this may be the only variable in social science that gets more predictive over time. And the reason is because intelligence isn't fixed. If you're smart, you tend to make smart decisions. You choose different paths in life. Those different paths in life have different outcomes and lead you to different things. And this leads you to different things. And why I'm interested in for human communication is I think smart people tend to like hanging around and talking to smart people. And you learn a lot from the people you're around. My guess is during your college education, you will learn as much or more from the people you go to school with as you will from your professors. If you go to an elite institution, you're surrounded by other smart people who have smart, good, cool ideas. That all soaks in. So in a way, being smart makes you smarter because you make decisions and life choices that get you exposed to new things. And the more you practice thinking, the better you get at it. So there's a trick to learning how to learn, right? And once you figure out how to learn, you get better at it. And that makes you able to learn more. And when you learn more, you catch on faster. And when you catch on faster, you catch on to new things faster. And you figure even more things out. And it just multiplies over life. Nobody in communication studies intelligence. They should. It's really important in who we marry, who our friends are, what our interaction looks like. Cool stuff. Next slide. This one's not perfectly related, but it's particularly about matching and who marries who. So this is a study, looks at brides and grooms, men and women. The attractiveness of the bride, the attractiveness of the groom, so male attractiveness, female attractive. No surprise here, the correlation is 0.34. Attractive people tend to marry, better looking people tend to marry better looking people. My guess is, I've never seen research on it, I would like to do research on it. My guess is this is higher in Korea. If we just went on the subway, we can tell couples, right? Take a picture of the couple, splice it, right? Have people rate one half of the couple, have other people rate other half of the couple, see how correlated they are. My guess is there's pretty strong correlation between. There's correlation everywhere, but I bet it's stronger here. Education, though, matters more than a physical appearance, than who you marry. More educated people tend to marry more educated people. And that affects bigger than attractive people tend to go out with attractive people. The good news for men is the higher education, the better looking your wife. The bad news for women is education will get you smart guy, but it won't get you sexy guy. Sorry, women. But over life, smart spouse will serve you better. Let's do one more, or a couple more. So last topic for the day is going to be narcissism. Besides intelligence, another variable I'm really super interested in these days is narcissism. Intelligence and empathy are the good side of communication. Narcissism's clearly the bad side. So the term narcissism comes from a Greek myth about a guy who was super good looking, and one day he's walking along and sees an image of himself in a river, and he just gets transfixed. Look how wonderful I am. And he stays there for all time, admiring himself. The narcissistic person is the person who's overly full of themselves. Interestingly, narcissism arrives from insecurity, or the most common form. There's multiple forms of it. The most common form is called compensatory. So these are people who actually have low self-esteem. If you have really high self-esteem and you're really secure, you don't need the admiration of others. So there's the super secure person, right? If you don't like what I do, that's your problem, right? The insecure people, though, need other people's admiration to boost, right? Because they don't feel good about themselves. They have low self-esteem. And the way we get self-esteem is from other people. So what they're always trying to do is compensate for their low self-esteem by trying to present themselves as a wonderful person. But that's not really who they are. And it leads to really, really messed up communication and poor relationships. So they present as very self-important and grand. Grandiosity is, aren't I grand? Aren't I wonderful? Look at me and what a wonderful, accomplished person I am. They're very concerned with image, how other people see them. Image is more, how other people see them is more important than who they are. They have a very fragile self. So their self is kind of like an egg. If it gets bumped, it might crack. If you've been following anything about Donald Trump, I don't know if any of you follow any of this or know anything about this, but any kind of insult seems to affect him so much. So when people with fragile self get insulted, they lash out. Secure people don't need to lash out, right? You insult a secure person, so what? Right? Because if I have good self-esteem, right, just because you say something mean to me, right, it's not going to change how I feel, right? They tend to be very exploitative and manipulative. They're always trying to use people to make themselves feel better. They want to be the center of attention. They want everybody to focus on them. They tend to have very impersonal relationships. They have lots of relationships with other people because they need other people to feel good. But because they're exploitive and manipulative, other people tend to get tired of it. So if you know a true narcissist and you know them over time, you'll see they tend to cycle through friends and hang in different circles over time. They have very hard time maintaining really good, solid, close relationships, which is what makes it so important for human communication, amongst other things. They are very self-entitled. They expect other people to do things for them. And they are devoid of empathy. They don't care about other people. You put all these together, it's really a recipe for bad communication. So some of the communicative implications, some of the things you'll see the highly narcissistic communicator do, they tend to fish for compliments. Do you understand that phrase? So if you go fishing, right? You have some bait and you throw it into the water and you hope to catch a fish, right? What narcissists want to catch are compliments. So they try to talk in such a way to get other people to say nice things about them. So they will structure the conversation so the conversation comes around to where you have an obligation to tell them how wonderful they are. One-up responses. If I was talking to a narcissist and I mentioned that I went to a good sushi place last night for dinner, which I did, I don't know the name of it though. They would have gone to a better one. Oh, you went to this place? That's not so good. I went to Sushi-O. Right? Better. If you go to Korea University, they went to Seoul National. You know. They try to always shift the conversation, topic of the conversation, back to self. They use lots and lots and lots of I's and me's and fewer inclusive pronouns like we. And they tend to tell you crazy things about themselves. That sounds really bad to most of us, but what they're trying to do is trying to get attention. Have you met people that have these characteristics and do these things? If it's narcissist, they will fit them all, or almost all of them. If you are worrying that you might be a narcissist, I have good news for you. You're not. If you worry that you're a narcissist, that would be being self-reflective. Narcissists aren't self-reflective. Right? Do narcissists ever wonder if they might have something wrong with them? No. They're wonderful. Right? Everybody else knows they're narcissist, but they don't. So if you're sure you're not narcissist, pay attention to how many first-person pronouns you're using. Right? And see if you really have empathy. Well, I hope you enjoyed. Thank you for having me.